Sheikh Rashid Al-Mazar and his young bride, Amira Haldeen, arrived in Dubai for what was supposed to be the wedding of a lifetime. But within days, their $8 million celebration spiraled into a nightmare of deception, fear, and nearly deadly secrets. The disappearance of Sheikh Rashid Al-Mazar, within minutes of his wife's collapse, became the center of urgent investigations across the island. The private security team, trained for emergencies but not for mysteries involving their employer, scrambled to review footage, lock down exits, and notify both Kuwaiti and Emirati authorities. Yet the island was small, and there were limited places to hide. The fact that he vanished without any sign of struggle or escape puzzled even the most experienced officers. As investigators arrived, they were met with a disturbing scene. The villa was quiet, the staff shaken, and the medical team still working to stabilize Amira. She remained unconscious, breathing weakly, with no visible injuries. Doctors reported that her condition appeared related to sudden shock or extreme stress, though they could not determine the exact cause without further tests. The absence of physical harm made her collapse even more mysterious. It seemed as though something she saw or learned overwhelmed her, but there was no evidence of what that could have been. Meanwhile, the torn envelope left behind in Rashid's leather case became the most important clue. The contents were missing, as if he had taken whatever was inside with him. For years, Rashid had kept his private life meticulously organized and free from unnecessary risk. His sudden panic and disappearance indicated something far outside his usual behavior. Investigators searched the villa room by room, hoping to find the missing paper or any hint about what it contained. But the space was spotless, with no documents or items out of place. The island's security cameras were reviewed carefully. Footage from earlier that day showed Rashid pacing near the shoreline, clutching the leather case. At one point he stopped walking, stared at the ocean for a long time, then hurried back toward the villa. His movements were tense and deliberate, as if he had made an important decision. The last footage of him showed him standing on the villa's balcony, gripping the torn envelope in one hand. Moments later, the camera outside the master bedroom recorded the sudden commotion that led to Amira's collapse. But Rashid's retreat from the villa hallway was unusually calm, almost robotic. It was as if he was following instructions no one else could hear. Authorities decided to begin a full search of the island. Teams swept the coastal cliffs, checking for signs of a fall or escape by sea. Drones scanned the dense patches of vegetation, and guards were stationed at every possible exit route. There was no boat missing, no broken branches indicating someone had forced their way into the forest, and no indication that Rashid had attempted to swim away. The conditions made it nearly impossible for him simply to vanish, yet that was exactly what had happened. Back at the mainland, news of Rashid's disappearance began to circulate quietly among officials. The families were informed privately, and both reacted with shock and confusion. Rashid's brother, Fahad Al-Mazar, immediately flew to the island, determined to uncover the truth himself. Fahad had always been closer to Rashid than anyone else, though he admitted that even he had not known much about Rashid's personal struggles. Rashid had always been secretive, refusing to share details about his work, his finances, or his private concerns. Fahad believed the answers had to be connected to whatever was in the envelope. As Fahad arrived, investigators updated him on the situation. He insisted on reviewing the footage himself and repeated the same question the staff asked: why would Rashid run? Fahad knew Rashid as cautious and intelligent, not someone who made impulsive decisions. The behavior implied fear, but fear of what? Rashid had no known enemies and no conflict that could lead to such panic, at least not any that his family was aware of. In the medical wing, Amira finally regained partial consciousness after hours of careful monitoring. She was disoriented and unable to speak clearly, slipping in and out of awareness. Doctors decided she was not yet stable enough to explain what had happened. Her pulse remained unsteady, and she reacted strongly when asked about Rashid, suggesting that the cause of her collapse was directly connected to him. She tried to move her hand, pointing weakly toward the door, as if trying to warn someone, then fell back into unconsciousness. The tension on the island grew with every hour that passed without new information. Investigators began to suspect that the key to the mystery lay in Rashid's past. A team was sent to inspect his personal files, electronic devices, and correspondence back in Kuwait. Another team interviewed members of both families, searching for any detail that could connect Rashid's anxiety to the wedding or the honeymoon. Slowly, small pieces of information emerged. Rashid reportedly received an envelope days before the wedding, delivered by a private courier whose name did not match any legitimate service. The courier left no return address, no identification, and no explanation. Rashid's assistant mentioned that Rashid had locked himself in his office for hours after receiving it, refusing to discuss the contents. His behavior changed noticeably afterwards. He became more alert, more tense, and more distant. He demanded increased security around the wedding, though he gave no specific reason. His decision to choose the secluded island for the honeymoon now appeared calculated, as if he believed someone might try to reach him. One detail stood out clearly. Rashid started keeping the envelope with him at all times, even when sleeping. It never left his sight, and he reacted sharply when anyone came close to it. This odd behavior suggested that the contents held a threat, a warning, or a revelation he felt unprepared to face. Meanwhile, a new piece of evidence surfaced. A guard found faint footprints near a rocky path behind the villa, a location rarely visited by staff. The prints matched Rashid's shoes and led toward a steep cliff that overlooked the water. At the edge of the cliff, investigators discovered a piece of torn paper lodged between two rocks. It was damp, damaged by wind and sea spray, but a single symbol remained visible, a crest unlike any known family or organization. The discovery raised more questions than answers. Rashid might have gone to the cliff, but why? And what did the symbol mean? The mystery deepened further when investigators noticed something unusual about the footprints. They led toward the cliff, but none led away. This left only one possibility, that Rashid have reached the cliff edge, but what happened afterwards remained unknown. The ocean below was deep, the waves strong, and the rocks sharp. If he had fallen, the water could have carried him far away by now. But there was no body, no clothing, no sign of anything floating. The island, once a paradise created for a peaceful honeymoon, now felt heavy with unanswered questions. Rashid's sudden disappearance, the torn envelope, the mysterious symbol, and Amira's collapse formed a puzzle with pieces that refused to fit together. It was only the beginning of what would become a dark and unexpected investigation, one that threatened to expose secrets deeper than anyone imagined.
The investigation into Sheikh Rashid Al-Mazar's disappearance intensified as authorities sifted through the scant clues left behind on the private island. Every detail, no matter how small, seemed significant. Investigators focused on the torn envelope found in Rashid's villa. Though partially destroyed, forensic experts managed to piece together fragments of paper containing printed lines and handwritten annotations. The text referenced a private medical report from a specialist clinic in Dubai and included dates, a patient code, and a signature. Dr. Selwyn Adero, a geneticist with a reputation for absolute discretion. The report hinted at information Rashid had requested in secret, but the contents were largely obscured or deliberately erased. Authorities immediately sought Dr. Adero, only to discover that the doctor had vanished 2 weeks before the wedding. His office in Dubai was abandoned, and internal servers had been wiped clean. Files on Amira's tests were missing, and only one partially intact folder remained in a desk drawer. The folder contained fragments of technical data and cryptic references to inheritance, lineage, and genetic markers. The evidence suggested that Rashid had been monitoring something far more complex than a simple medical condition, something that, in his eyes, required immediate attention. Meanwhile, Amira was stabilized at a top medical facility in Kuwait. Though physically unharmed, she remained disoriented and weak. Doctors determined that her collapse had been caused by extreme emotional and physiological stress. She had been overwhelmed, but what could have triggered such a reaction remained unclear. Her family's concern grew as they watched her condition fluctuate, and they demanded answers from authorities. Investigators were limited in what they could share, citing security and privacy concerns. But the implication was clear. Something had occurred that shocked both bride and groom. While the hospital worked to restore Amira's health, forensic teams scoured Rashid's private properties in Kuwait. In the basement of his main villa, they discovered a hidden room that appeared to have served as a private research space. The walls were covered with photographs, charts, and diagrams connected to Amira's family, her ancestry, and her lineage. The room contained torn pages, scattered notebooks, and a single blood-stained jacket belonging to Dr. Adero. Forensic analysis indicated the blood was not fresh, suggesting the incident had occurred prior to Rashid's disappearance. The presence of the jacket raised urgent questions. Had Dr. Adero been forced to participate in something against his will? Had he been harmed to keep the contents of the report secret? Investigators began to reconstruct Rashid's actions in the hours leading up to Amira's collapse. Security footage from the villa revealed him pacing nervously near the balcony, frequently checking a mobile device. Moments before the collapse, he appeared to receive a call from an unknown number. The voice on the recording was distorted, but Rashid's reaction suggested alarm and urgency. He moved quickly to the bedroom, where the disturbance occurred. The footage captured faint sounds of struggle and commotion, though no additional persons were visible. Within minutes, Rashid left the room abruptly, holding the envelope and moving toward the villa exit. Then authorities traced Rashid's movements after leaving the villa. Security logs revealed that he had arranged for a private jet to depart to a remote desert region hours before his disappearance. Flight records confirmed he had boarded alone. The pilot later explained that Rashid requested to be dropped in a location with minimal contact, a desolate area with difficult terrain and few inhabitants. Investigators theorized that Rashid sought isolation, either to protect himself or to deal with information that had unnerved him. At the desert drop site, search teams discovered signs of Rashid's presence. Footprints led to a small fire pit and scattered papers from the partially destroyed medical report. The fragments referred to a rare hereditary condition connected to lineage, one that had been deliberately concealed for generations. Though harmless medically, it carried cultural and family implications of profound importance to Rashid. This revelation explained why he had reacted with such urgency, and why the wedding and honeymoon had become fraught with tension. Meanwhile, authorities attempted to locate Dr. Adero, whose disappearance had coincided with the sealed envelope's arrival. Investigators believed that the doctor may have been coerced or intimidated to maintain secrecy. His jacket in Rashid's private research room and the destroyed fragments of the report suggested he had been closely involved in providing the information Rashid had sought. Investigators could not yet determine whether Dr. Adero had been harmed, complicit, or hiding to avoid potential danger. Amira's family, unaware of these intricate details, grew increasingly concerned. They insisted that the medical documents and the investigation remain confidential, fearing public scandal. Authorities agreed to protect sensitive information while continuing to gather evidence. Meanwhile, investigators focused on tracing any external parties who could have influenced Rashid or interfered with Dr. Adero's clinic. They discovered that parts of the server wipe and the envelope delivery had been orchestrated from offshore accounts linked to an unknown financier. The situation grew more complex when forensic analysis revealed faint fingerprints on the envelope that did not match Rashid or any known staff. This suggested that a third party may have been involved in delivering the information or manipulating events. Investigators realized that what appeared to be a private, family-centered crisis might have been engineered by someone with hidden motives, someone seeking to exploit Rashid's anxieties for personal gain. By the end of the week, authorities concluded that Rashid's disappearance, Amira's collapse, and Dr. Adero's vanishing were intertwined in a chain of events rooted in secret lineage, cultural expectations, and external manipulation. The seemingly simple luxury wedding had become a complex investigation involving hidden agendas, fragile loyalties, and shadowy forces. Every clue pointed to a truth more unsettling than anyone had anticipated, leaving the question of who orchestrated the chaos and why still unanswered. The mystery deepened as search teams prepared to pursue Rashid into the desert, while simultaneously tracing the origins of the envelope, the offshore accounts, and the missing geneticist. What had been intended as a union of wealth and prestige had evolved into a tangled web of secrecy, fear, and unanswered questions that threatened to destroy reputations, marriages, and lives.
As Sheikh Rashid remained missing in the remote desert, investigators turned their attention to the fragments of the torn medical report and the mysterious offshore financier. Every lead hinted at a deeper conspiracy that extended far beyond the wedding and honeymoon. The isolated villa on the island had been thoroughly examined, yet new discoveries continued to emerge. Among the scattered papers in Rashid's hidden research room, analysts found cryptic sketches resembling maps, charts of family trees, and symbols that appeared ceremonial. The markings suggested that Rashid had believed he was uncovering a truth tied to centuries-old customs, a secret his family had preserved carefully over generations. Meanwhile, Amira began to regain more coherent awareness, though her memories were fragmented. She recalled the moment before her collapse with a vague sense of fear, a sensation of urgency she could not explain. Doctors and investigators interpreted her reaction as extreme stress, triggered by what she had been told or what she had witnessed. Even small details, such as Rashid's obsessive focus on the envelope and the sudden commotion in the villa, had contributed to her psychological strain. Her inability to recall specifics left authorities dependent on circumstantial evidence, creating a puzzle that became increasingly complex. The desert search intensified as teams combed through the area where Rashid's private jet had left him. Footprints led to a small rocky plateau where remnants of a makeshift campsite were discovered. Investigators found scattered papers, a partially burned notebook, and a fire pit. The notebook contained notes written in a shaky hand, detailing observations about family lineage, genetic markers, and the rare hereditary condition referenced in Dr. Selwyn Adero's report. While the medical condition itself was harmless, Rashid appeared to have interpreted it as a threat to the integrity of his family's bloodline, elevating an otherwise trivial fact into a matter of immense urgency. The partially burned notebook also contained a series of cryptic references to outside interference. Rashid had written about unusual phone calls, distorted messages, and a sense that someone was monitoring his actions. Investigators began to consider the possibility that Rashid was not acting alone in his panic, that he may have been influenced or manipulated by an unknown third party. This theory gained traction when financial records revealed transfers from offshore accounts that had funded private research and attempted to conceal Dr. Adero's clinic records. Someone had orchestrated events to destabilize Rashid, but the motive remained unclear. Search teams eventually located Rashid, dehydrated and disoriented, behind a dune near the plateau. He was taken into custody for medical evaluation, unable or unwilling to provide a coherent explanation for his behavior. The authorities immediately began questioning his mental state, noting signs of extreme stress and obsession with ancestral rules. He seemed fixated on the fragments of the envelope, the cryptic notes, and the idea that the integrity of his family lineage had been compromised. It became clear that Rashid's actions were driven not by malice toward Amira, but by panic and fear of dishonor. While Rashid recovered, investigators focused on the missing geneticist, Dr. Adero. His disappearance had coincided with the arrival of the sealed envelope, and his jacket, found in Rashid's villa, suggested he had been present in the planning stages. Analysts theorized that Dr. Adero may have been coerced into conducting genetic tests or had knowledge of sensitive information regarding Amira's family history. The doctor's absence added another layer of complexity, suggesting that the situation was orchestrated to manipulate Rashid psychologically. Authorities also explored Amira's family history in detail. It was revealed that her ancestry included connections to a small ancient tribe with historical ties to Rashid's family. While harmless medically, the lineage carried symbolic weight in the region, triggering Rashid's deep-seated concern for family honor. Investigators concluded that Rashid's sudden panic was rooted in a misinterpretation of these cultural implications, amplified by outside interference that exploited his fears. Meanwhile, forensic teams analyzed the faint fingerprints found on the envelope and the shredded pages. They did not match Rashid, Amira, or any island staff, confirming the involvement of a third party. Investigators theorized that someone had intentionally manipulated Rashid, fabricating evidence and triggering his panic to create a scandal. The offshore accounts, erased clinic files, and coordinated phone calls pointed to a calculated plot designed to destabilize him, leaving Amira vulnerable and confused. The pieces began to fit together. Rashid's disappearance, the medical report, Dr. Adero's vanishing, and Amira's collapse were all part of a larger chain of events orchestrated by an unknown manipulator. Investigators realized that the luxurious wedding had been used as a stage for psychological manipulation, designed to provoke Rashid to act irrationally. By exploiting his obsession with family honor and secrecy, the unknown party had created a scenario where panic, fear, and confusion led to a near tragedy. As night fell over the desert search site, teams prepared for the next phase of the investigation, tracking the origin of the offshore accounts and identifying the unknown financier behind the scheme. Investigators recognized that the mastermind had extensive knowledge of Rashid's routines, access to sophisticated methods of manipulation, and the ability to orchestrate complex events from a distance. The realization that the crisis had been engineered rather than accidental reframed the entire investigation. By the end of the day, investigators understood that Rashid and Amira had been caught in a web of deception. The wedding that was meant to unite families and celebrate love had become the starting point of a calculated manipulation. The physical collapse of Amira and the psychological collapse of Rashid were not random. They were the result of careful planning, exploiting fear, lineage, and secrecy. The stage was now set for the authorities to uncover the identity of the hidden orchestrator and reveal the true extent of the scheme that had almost destroyed 2 lives in a single night.
After days of investigation, authorities finally began piecing together the full scope of the events surrounding Sheikh Rashid Al-Mazar and Amira Haldeen. Rashid had been located in the desert, exhausted and dehydrated, but safe. Amira had recovered enough to speak, though her memories remained fragmented and vague. The envelope, Dr. Adero's disappearance, and the mysterious offshore accounts suggested a larger conspiracy, one that had manipulated Rashid's fears and nearly destroyed both their lives. Investigators realized the bloodbath was not physical, but psychological, a carefully orchestrated chain of events designed to provoke panic and chaos. Forensic teams traced the financial trail behind the envelope and the missing documents.
The offshore accounts were registered under shell companies in multiple countries, all linked to a single name, Nadir Farel, a wealthy rival of Rashid's family. Nadir had been seeking to destabilize Rashid's influence over family business dealings and regional alliances. By feeding false information, erasing clinic records, and creating pressure on Rashid through manipulated reports, Nadir had managed to turn the groom's obsession with family honor into a tool of psychological torment. Investigators realized that the plan had been in motion for months, timed perfectly to coincide with the wedding, ensuring maximum stress and public exposure if anything went wrong. Dr. Selwyn Aguro remained missing, but the fragments of his notebooks and the torn jacket discovered in Rashid's villa suggested that he had been coerced into participating in Nadir's scheme. Notes indicated that Aguro had been pressured to alter medical results to create ambiguity, leaving Rashid vulnerable to misinterpretation. Investigators suspected that Aguro had either gone into hiding or had been detained to prevent him from revealing the truth. The doctor's disappearance, combined with the offshore manipulation, confirmed that Rashid and Amira had been caught in a calculated web designed to exploit every weakness. Amira's recollections, though incomplete, provided further insight. She remembered a sudden argument with Rashid shortly before her collapse, his voice tense and anxious as he held the envelope. She recalled the sense of urgency, the feeling of danger, and the strange symbols on some of the papers he had been reviewing. Even without full understanding, she could see that Rashid had been under immense psychological pressure. The authorities concluded that the collapse had been triggered not by any intentional physical act, but by Rashid's erratic behavior under the influence of fear and misinformation. Investigators then focused on tracking Rashid's exact movements during the desert episode. The footprints, the partially burned notebook, and the fire pit all suggested that he had isolated himself intentionally. He had been trying to make sense of the information he had uncovered and the potential threat it represented to his family's legacy. Rashid's obsession with the genetic report, coupled with the fabricated elements of Nadir's scheme, had created a scenario where he felt trapped between family honor, cultural expectations, and a mysterious, unseen enemy. The puzzle began to resolve when investigators connected the offshore accounts, falsified medical records, and manipulated communications directly to Nadir Farel. Nadir had orchestrated every step of the plan, from sending the sealed envelope to hiring unknown operatives to erase files from Dr. Aguro's clinic. His motive was clear. By creating panic and confusion within Rashid's household, he hoped to provoke a scandal that would weaken the Al-Mazar family's influence, potentially giving him control over lucrative business ventures. Rashid, once he understood the scheme, expressed a mixture of relief and horror. He had almost allowed panic and fear to dictate his actions, putting Amira at risk without realizing the true source of the pressure. Investigators concluded that had it not been for the rapid intervention of authorities, the results could have been catastrophic. Rashid had been close to making irreversible decisions based on false assumptions. And Amira's collapse was a direct consequence of the psychological stress he had endured. The investigation led authorities to a final confrontation. Nadir Farel was located in a private villa overseas, attempting to manage the fallout remotely. Authorities moved quickly, coordinating with international law enforcement to secure his arrest. Evidence from offshore accounts, digital communications, and financial transactions left little room for dispute. Nadir was detained and transported for questioning. Confronted with the evidence, his scheme became undeniable. He had created a complex chain of deception, preying on Rashid's fears and manipulating every element of the wedding, honeymoon, and aftermath. With Nadir's arrest, the mystery surrounding the wedding finally began to resolve. Dr. Aguro's role remained murky, but investigators suspected that he had been forced into complicity and had remained in hiding to avoid repercussions. Rashid and Amira were reunited under the protection of family and authorities.
Rashid, though shaken, had regained composure and an understanding of how easily fear and manipulation could override reason. Amira, though traumatized, found reassurance in the fact that the events had been orchestrated, not random, and that her life had been preserved despite the chaos. The $8 million wedding, once celebrated for its luxury and spectacle, now stood as a cautionary tale. The bloodbath had not been literal, but psychological, a testament to the power of manipulation, secrecy, and unchecked fear. Families, authorities, and observers across the region reflected on the fragility of trust and the devastating consequences of deception. What began as a union of wealth and prestige had nearly ended in catastrophe, proving that even the most carefully arranged plans could be exploited when hidden motives and unseen forces intervened. In the end, the investigation revealed that the real danger had never been the marriage itself, but the hidden puppet strings that could control even the most disciplined mind. Rashid and Amira survived, but the memory of those days, the envelope, and the desert ordeal would remain a haunting reminder of how quickly a dream wedding could become the center of a deadly psychological trap.
With Nadir Farel under arrest, investigators began to untangle the full extent of his manipulations and the damage they had caused to Sheikh Rashid Al-Mazar and Amira Haldeen. The scale of the operation became apparent as authorities reviewed financial transactions, encrypted messages, and covert communications. Nadir had spent months orchestrating a plan that exploited Rashid's sense of duty, honor, and family pride. Every detail, from the sealed envelope to the erased clinic records, was calculated to provoke fear, doubt, and hasty decisions. What had seemed like a personal or private crisis was in fact an elaborate scheme designed to destabilize one of the region's wealthiest families. Authorities discovered that Nadir had hired operatives to follow Rashid discreetly, monitor his behavior, and report any signs of vulnerability. These operatives had left no physical evidence at the island or the desert site, using coded messages to communicate. Investigators confirmed that the offshore accounts had funded both the surveillance and the manipulation of Dr. Selwyn Nadero. The doctor had been pressured to falsify reports and destroy records, creating the illusion of a medical anomaly that Rashid could interpret as a threat to his family's honor. The psychological pressure on Rashid had been meticulously engineered, leaving him disoriented and desperate during the honeymoon. Rashid himself remained under medical and psychological supervision. Although physically unharmed, the weeks of stress, isolation, and panic had taken a visible toll. His once steady demeanor now bore signs of exhaustion, tension, and unease. Mental health professionals worked alongside investigators to reconstruct his thought processes, attempting to understand how he had interpreted the envelope, the torn notes, and the cryptic warnings. Their analysis revealed a man trapped between reason and fear, manipulated by external forces he could neither see nor fully understand. Meanwhile, Amira slowly regained clarity and began to recall fragmented events from the villa and the desert. Her memories included Rashid's obsession with the envelope, the sudden commotion in the bedroom, and the fear in his eyes as he rushed toward the villa exit. Though she could not piece together every detail, the fragments confirmed that Rashid had been under immense psychological pressure. Her own collapse had been a response to the tension, fear, and emotional chaos surrounding her, demonstrating how manipulation can extend beyond the targeted individual and affect everyone nearby. Investigators focused on connecting the final dots of Nadir's plan. Analysis of digital records revealed that Nadir had not only manipulated Rashid's perception, but had also anticipated the couple's movements on the island. He had studied the villa's layout, the surrounding cliffs, and the desert drop site. His strategy relied on Rashid isolating himself, allowing panic to set in, and creating a scenario where Amira would inadvertently be endangered. Every step had been premeditated to appear accidental or coincidental, ensuring that the psychological impact was maximized without drawing immediate suspicion. The investigation into Dr. Adero intensified. While the doctor's physical whereabouts remained unknown, recovered fragments of his notes suggested he had been unwillingly involved in the falsification of reports and the manipulation of genetic data. Authorities hypothesized that Adero had been coerced, possibly under threats to his reputation, safety, or family. The evidence confirmed that Adero's role was indirect but essential, providing the credibility Rashid needed to take the documents seriously and react as Nadir had intended. As investigators reviewed all available evidence, a pattern emerged. Nadir's plan had hinged on exploiting cultural and familial expectations. Rashid's interpretation of the genetic report, though factually harmless, was magnified by a lifetime of upbringing focused on family honor. Nadir understood that fear of dishonor would override rational thinking, leading Rashid to isolate himself, panic, and act unpredictably. The scheme was psychological warfare, executed with precision to create maximum disruption and almost ensure disaster. Financial experts traced Nadir's transactions further, discovering payments made to anonymous couriers, data hackers, and offshore facilitators. These payments revealed the breadth of his operation and the lengths he was willing to go to destabilize the Al-Mazar family. The meticulous coordination suggested not only intelligence and cunning, but also a deep understanding of human psychology, specifically Rashid's weaknesses. Nadir had created a situation where panic, isolation, and perceived betrayal could generate chaos without any physical confrontation. Authorities now had to focus on restoring stability. Rashid and Amira were relocated to a secure residence, monitored by both security and psychological professionals. Rashid's recovery was slow. The experience had shaken his confidence, leaving him wary of his own instincts. Amira, though physically stronger, remained emotionally vulnerable, aware that unseen forces had almost destroyed her life. Investigators emphasized counseling, security, and family support to prevent residual fear from escalating into further trauma. The final revelation came as investigators compiled the complete chain of Nadir's manipulations. Every element, the sealed envelope, the erased clinic files, Dr. Adero's involvement, the desert drop, the cryptic notes, and the offshore funding, fit together to reveal a calculated, deliberate plot. Rashid's near collapse, Amira's unconscious state, and the dramatic desert search were all predictable outcomes of Nadir's strategy. What had begun as a lavish wedding and honeymoon had been transformed into a high-stakes psychological trap designed to humiliate, destabilize, and exploit the couple.
With Nadir Farel in custody, authorities shifted focus from the immediate crisis to understanding the full scope of his manipulation and the long-term consequences for Sheikh Rashid Al-Mazar and Amira Haldeen. Though physically safe, both Rashid and Amira were left to grapple with the psychological aftermath of the ordeal. Rashid's reputation had been shaken in subtle ways, despite the truth being slowly revealed, and Amira's trust in the world outside her family had been deeply tested. Investigators emphasized that the events had been orchestrated not through violence, but through careful planning, psychological pressure, and exploitation of cultural and familial expectations. Nadir's network proved more extensive than initially thought. Investigators discovered layers of communication, linking offshore accounts to couriers, hackers, and unknown operatives who had facilitated every stage of his plan. Each element of the scheme had been designed to reinforce panic and uncertainty. The sealed envelope, containing manipulated or partial medical documents, had been the centerpiece of the manipulation, while the falsified records from Dr. Selwyn Adero's clinic added credibility to the illusion of a threat. By carefully controlling information and creating an atmosphere of urgency, Nadir ensured that Rashid reacted instinctively, isolated himself in the desert, and inadvertently put Amira in a state of extreme stress. Investigators analyzed Rashid's actions during the desert episode. Footprints, partially burned notes, and the fire pit provided insight into his state of mind. He had isolated himself to think, reading and rereading the fragments of the envelope, and reacting to perceived threats that did not exist. His panic, though understandable in context, had created a chain reaction that nearly escalated into a true tragedy. Psychological experts emphasized that Nadir's plan had relied entirely on exploiting Rashid's upbringing, values, and deep sense of family honor. Rashid's intense loyalty to tradition had made him a perfect target for manipulation. Meanwhile, Amira slowly recovered her strength and began to process the ordeal. She spent time reviewing the villa, the envelope fragments, and the scattered notes, under the supervision of investigators and counselors. Although her memories of the collapse were incomplete, she began to piece together the psychological pressure Rashid had experienced and the deliberate deception that had manipulated him. The realization that an unknown individual had orchestrated the events left her shaken, but also relieved that she had not been in physical danger. Investigators then turned their attention to tracing Dr. Selwyn Adero. Although the geneticist remained missing, his partial notes and the torn jacket found in Rashid's villa suggested that he had been coerced but unharmed. Authorities concluded that Adero's disappearance had been a deliberate attempt to keep him from revealing details about Nadir's scheme. The lack of direct harm indicated that the manipulation had focused entirely on psychological pressure, proving the sophistication of the plot. The financial and digital trail provided the most concrete evidence against Nadir. Offshore accounts, encrypted messages, and payment records linked him directly to the courier who delivered the envelope, the operatives who wiped the clinic servers, and the hackers who erased digital evidence. Investigators confirmed that Nadir had also monitored the couple's movements on the island, tracking their location and timing the delivery of the manipulated envelope to maximize its impact. Every step had been carefully orchestrated to exploit Rashid's fears and destabilize him. Once sufficient evidence was compiled, Nadir was formally charged with psychological manipulation, fraud, and conspiracy to cause harm. Legal experts noted the unusual nature of the case. No physical crime had occurred, yet the calculated psychological and emotional distress inflicted on Rashid and Amira were unprecedented. The case became a landmark in demonstrating how manipulation and deception could be weaponized without traditional violence. Rashid and Amira faced the challenge of rebuilding their lives. Authorities advised relocating them temporarily while the trial progressed to ensure their safety and to allow them space to recover. Rashid underwent counseling to process the panic and fear that had driven his actions, while Amira focused on regaining emotional stability. Together, they revisited the villa and the desert site under supervision, understanding how the manipulation had unfolded step by step. Each revelation brought relief, but also reinforced the psychological weight of the ordeal. Over time, the story of the $8 million wedding and the nearly catastrophic honeymoon became widely known, though with sensitive details withheld to protect privacy. Observers marveled at the scale of the scheme, the cleverness of the manipulations, and the resilience of Rashid and Amira. The wedding, once a symbol of luxury and prestige, now served as a cautionary tale about trust, secrecy, and the hidden forces that can threaten even the most protected lives. The $8 million wedding survived the headlines, but its legacy became one of caution, a reminder that deception and manipulation can transform even dreams into nightmares.